Baal. Baal, whose name in Semitic languages simply means Lord or owner, was the storm and fertility god of the Canaanites and Phoenicians. He embodied the power of rain, thunder, lightning, and dew, the essential forces that sustained life in the Levant's fragile agricultural environment. His worshippers believed he dwelt on Mount Zaphon, a towering peak in modern Syria, from where he commanded the weather. His animal symbol was the bull, representing virility and strength. Iconography from Ugarit shows Baal as a warrior wearing a horned helmet, holding a mace in one hand and a lightning spear in the other. This imagery linked him directly to agricultural abundance, as the rains he brought were thought to fertilize the land. The mythology of Baal is preserved in the Baal cycle, a series of Ugaritic tablets dating from roughly 1400 to 1200 BCE. The texts describe two central conflicts. In the first, Baal battles Yam, the chaotic god of the sea. Using two magical weapons forged by a craftsman deity, Baal defeats Yam and secures kingship among the gods. With Asherah's intercession, he is granted permission to build a grand palace, cementing his role as ruler. His second conflict is with Mot, the god of death and sterility. In this myth, Baal is slain and descends into the underworld, mirroring the seasonal cycle of summer drought when vegetation dies. His sister and consort, the goddess Anat, avenges him with violent force, killing and dismembering Mot. Baal is then resurrected, bringing back autumn rains and restoring fertility to the earth. This myth explained the cycles of drought and rain that defined the region's agriculture. In the Hebrew Bible, Baal emerges as the chief rival to Yahweh. Israel's repeated lapses into Baal worship are portrayed as acts of spiritual treachery punished by famine, invasion, or exile. The climax of this conflict is seen in the contest on Mount Carmel, recorded in 1 Kings chapter 18. There, Elijah challenges 450 prophets of Baal to call down fire upon a sacrifice. Despite their frenzied rituals, Baal remains silent. Elijah then prays, and Yahweh sends fire from heaven that consumes the altar, followed by life-giving rain that ends a long drought. The narrative presents Yahweh as the true master of storm and fertility, stripping Baal of his defining attributes. Archaeological discoveries confirm Baal's prominence. Temples and figurines across Canaan and Phoenician cities show he was worshipped widely. Excavations at Lachish uncovered figurines of a smiting god consistent with Baal's imagery, while Tel Burna revealed evidence of large cultic gatherings with feasting and sacrifice. These finds prove Baal was not just a literary foil, but a central feature of ancient religious life. The biblical writers portray Baal worship not as a foreign curiosity, but as a direct, entrenched challenge to Yahweh. His cult was local, adaptable, and deeply tied to the land, a system that had to be theologically dismantled in order for Yahweh to be recognized as the sole God of Israel. Asherah. Asherah, also known in Ugaritic texts as Atharat, was a central figure in the Canaanite pantheon. She was revered as the great mother goddess, the creatress of the gods, and the consort of El, the high god of the Canaanites. Together, they were said to have given birth to 70 divine beings. Asherah's power was tied to fertility, life, and cosmic order. Her symbols included the sacred tree, representing growth and life, the lion, symbolizing authority and protection, and serpents, associated with healing and immortality. Ancient texts sometimes call her Lady Asherah of the Sea, highlighting her dominion over both creation and mystery. In practice, Asherah was venerated through sacred wooden poles or stylized tree-like carvings. These cult objects, called Asherim, were placed beside altars and on high places across Canaan and Israel. The Hebrew Bible mentions them more than 40 times, condemning their use as idolatry. Verses describe them being erected on every high hill and under every green tree, 1 Kings 14:23. Reformist kings such as Asa, Hezekiah, and Josiah are praised for cutting down and burning these symbols. Deuteronomy 16:21 explicitly forbids planting any tree as an Asherah beside Yahweh's altar, marking the practice as a direct violation of covenant law. Despite this condemnation, evidence shows that many Israelites incorporated Asherah into Yahweh's own cult. Inscriptions discovered at Kontelet Adrud in the Sinai Desert from the 8th century BCE read, "I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah." A similar formula was found at Khirbet el-Kom in Judah. These suggest that Asherah was not seen only as a foreign goddess but possibly as Yahweh's consort, worshipped alongside him. Some scholars argue that the phrase, "his Asherah," refers to the cult object rather than the goddess herself, but the pairing of names and blessings indicates that many people envisioned her as Yahweh's divine partner. Even the Jerusalem temple was not free from her cult. According to 2 Kings 21:7, King Manasseh placed an image of Asherah within the temple, and women were said to weave hangings for her there. This continued until Josiah's reforms in the late 7th century BCE. The persistence of her worship suggests that Asherah was not a marginal figure but a deeply rooted part of Israelite religious life. The biblical writers worked to erase Asherah's identity. While Canaanite texts treat her as a powerful goddess, the Hebrew scriptures often reduce the word Asherah to mean simply a wooden pole, stripping her divinity and rendering her powerless. This linguistic strategy transformed a living goddess into an inanimate object, easy to burn or destroy. The campaign against her reveals how central she was to Israel's popular religion and how much effort it took to remove the divine feminine from the official theology. Molech. Molech, sometimes rendered as Moloch or Milcom, is one of the most infamous deities mentioned in the Bible, remembered above all for his association with child sacrifice. His worship was tied to the Ammonites, Israel's neighbors east of the Jordan River. The very name Molech may have been a deliberate insult created by scribes who combined the consonants of the word Melech, meaning king, with the vowels of Bosheth, meaning shame. This transformed the name into a title of disgrace, emphasizing the horror of his cult. The Bible gives little physical description of Molech's idol, but later accounts, especially from Greek and Roman writers describing Phoenician and Carthaginian practices, portray a terrifying image. Molech was said to be represented as a massive bronze statue with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The statue was hollow, and fire was lit inside it until it glowed red hot. Children placed upon its outstretched arms would roll into the furnace within. Loud drums and flutes reportedly accompanied the ritual to drown out the cries of the victims. The Hebrew scriptures consistently denounce this cult in the strongest possible terms. Leviticus 18:21 commands, "Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech," while Leviticus 20, verses 2 through 5, prescribes the death penalty for anyone who participates. The practice is described as causing sons and daughters to pass through the fire. The central location of these rites was the Valley of Ben Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem's walls. This place, known as Topheth, became so tainted by its associations with child sacrifice that its name, Gehenna, was later used as a symbol for hell itself. Kings such as Ahaz and Manasseh are accused of burning their own children there. Only Josiah's reforms in the late 7th century BCE are said to have desecrated the site, halting the practice. Modern scholarship has debated whether Molech was truly a distinct deity or if the term MLK referred to a type of sacrifice. The German scholar Otto Eisfeld proposed in 1935 that MLK denoted a class of votive offerings, sometimes involving children, which could have been directed to several gods, not only to Molech. Some passages, such as Jeremiah 32:35, link child sacrifice to Baal worship, suggesting overlap between cults. Other evidence from Mesopotamian and Ugaritic texts points to a god named Malek or MLK associated with the underworld, strengthening the case for Molech as a distinct deity. Archaeology has uncovered chilling parallels at Carthage and other Phoenician settlements. Sacred burial grounds called tophets have yielded thousands of urns containing the cremated remains of infants, often accompanied by animal bones, and marked with inscriptions dedicating the sacrifice to Baal, Hammon, and Tanit. Forensic studies show a high concentration of infants between 1 and 3 months old, suggesting deliberate ritual killing rather than natural mortality. While direct proof of child sacrifice in Jerusalem remains elusive, this Punic evidence makes the biblical descriptions highly credible. The condemnation of Molech worship drew a stark line between Yahweh and the gods of Israel's neighbors. While Baal or Asherah could be condemned for leading Israel into idolatry, Molech embodied an abomination beyond all tolerance. In Jeremiah 32:35, Yahweh declares that child sacrifice was something he never commanded, nor did it enter my mind. This rejection defines Yahweh's character in opposition to Molech. The God of Israel is not one who demands children in fire, but one who preserves life. Chemosh. Chemosh was the national god of the Moabites, a Semitic people who lived east of the Dead Sea. His worship was so central to their identity that the Bible refers to them as the people of Chemosh. Numbers 21-29. The exact meaning of his name is uncertain, but scholars have suggested destroyer, subduer, or even a possible link to a fish deity. What is clear is that Chemosh was primarily a war god, believed to grant Moab victory in battle and to punish them with defeat when angered. Chemosh is best known from the Mesha stele, also called the Moabite stone, discovered in the 19th century at Dagon. This 9th century BCE inscription records the words of King Mesha of Moab, who rebelled against Israelite domination. In the text, Mesha attributes his people's earlier suffering to Chemosh's anger and their later victories to Chemosh's favor. He describes how Chemosh commanded him to attack the city of Nebo, and after taking it, Mesha carried out a ritual slaughter of its inhabitants, devoting 7,000 people to destruction in honor of Chemosh and Astarte Chemosh. He even boasts of seizing altars of Yahweh and dragging them before Chemosh as a demonstration of his God's supremacy. This theology closely mirrors Israel's own understanding of Yahweh. Just as Yahweh is depicted as becoming angry with Israel and using foreign nations to punish them, Chemosh is shown as disciplining Moab and then restoring them through victory. Both gods were seen as patrons of their people, tied to their nation's fate. In fact, the Bible describes how King Mesha, under siege by Israel, Judah, and Edom, sacrificed his own firstborn son on the city wall. 2 Kings 3:27. This desperate act is said to have unleashed great wrath against Israel, forcing their withdrawal. The story suggests that even the biblical writers acknowledged the perceived power of Chemosh in Moabite eyes. The worship of Chemosh was not confined to Moab. The Bible states that King Solomon, influenced by his foreign wives, built a high place for Chemosh east of Jerusalem, 1 Kings 11:7. This shrine remained for centuries until it was destroyed during Josiah's reforms in the late 7th century BCE. Its longevity shows that Chemosh's cult was not just tolerated, but institutionally embedded in Jerusalem's religious life, possibly serving diplomatic purposes with Moab. Theologically, Chemosh represents a mirror image of Yahweh. To the Moabites, he was their divine protector and national patron. To the Israelites, he was an abomination. Yet the Mesha stele demonstrates that both nations viewed history through the same lens. Victories and defeats were the will of their God. Chemosh was not a caricature, but a genuine rival in the religious and political world of the Iron Age Levant. The polemic against him in the Bible reflects the exclusivity of Yahweh's claim, not necessarily a difference in divine function. Dagon. Dagon, also called Dagon, was a deity with ancient roots in Mesopotamia and Syria, worshipped as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. His name is most often linked to the Semitic root dgn, meaning grain, suggesting he was originally a god of agriculture and fertility. Over time, however, a popular association arose with the Hebrew word dag, meaning fish, giving rise to the enduring image of Dagon as a fish god. This portrayal may have developed when seafaring peoples like the Phoenicians and Philistines adopted him, blending his agricultural identity with maritime symbolism. In Ugaritic mythology, Dagon is described as the father of Baal, which placed him in the upper hierarchy of the pantheon. His cult was widespread, with major centers in Mari and Terka in the Middle Euphrates region. There, he was revered not only as a fertility deity but also as a god who legitimized kingship, granting earthly rulers authority. When the Philistines established themselves along the Mediterranean coast, Dagon became one of their chief gods, with temples in Ashdod and Gaza. The Bible presents Dagon most famously in the story of the Ark of the Covenant in 1 Samuel 5. After the Philistines captured the Ark, they placed it in Dagon's temple in Ashdod as a symbol of Yahweh's defeat. The next morning, the priests found Dagon's statue toppled face down before the Ark. They set it upright, but the following morning it was discovered again on the ground, this time with its head and hands severed, leaving only the torso. The narrative portrays this as a symbolic execution, showing Dagon powerless before Yahweh. A plague then spread through Philistine cities until the ark was returned, further emphasizing Yahweh's supremacy. Another major biblical episode tied to Dagon is the death of Samson in Judges 16. After Samson was captured and blinded, the Philistines brought him into Dagon's temple in Gaza during a great festival. They praised Dagon for delivering their enemy into their hands. In his final act, Samson prayed for strength, pulled down the temple's central pillars, and collapsed the building, killing himself and thousands of Philistines. The story again demonstrates Yahweh's power in the very house of a rival god. The biblical polemic against Dagon is unique because it mocks the very concept of idolatry. Unlike Baal or Chemosh, whose theological domains mirrored Yahweh's, Dagon is humiliated through stories that depict his statue falling, breaking, and requiring human hands to stand. This satirical portrayal communicates that idols are not living gods but powerless objects. Interestingly, the imagery of Dagon as a fish god resonates with later biblical literature. The book of Jonah describes the prophet being swallowed by a great fish before traveling to Nineveh, a region where Dagon worship was known. For audiences familiar with fish god imagery, Jonah's miraculous survival inside a sea creature could be seen as Yahweh asserting dominance over Dagon's supposed realm. Dagon's legacy illustrates how Israel's writers used both satire and symbolism to delegitimize foreign deities. By portraying his idols as toppling before the ark and his temple collapsing in ruin, the Bible frames him as utterly impotent before Yahweh's will. Astarte. Astarte, known in Hebrew as Ashtoreth, was the Canaanite and Phoenician form of the great Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, who herself derived from the Sumerian goddess Inanna. She embodied a dual identity that encompassed both fertility and sexuality on one hand and war and destruction on the other. This complexity made her one of the most widely revered goddesses of the ancient world. Her worship spread across the Levant, into Egypt, and throughout the Mediterranean via Phoenician trade. In Cyprus, her cult merged with local traditions, influencing the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Astarte was strongly tied to the planet Venus, which shines as both the morning and evening star. Because of this, she was often given the title Queen of Heaven, a name that appears in Egyptian records and in the Hebrew Bible. Her symbols reflected her broad powers: lions for strength in battle, horses and chariots in her warrior role, doves for love and fertility, and the star itself for her celestial identity. Artistic depictions often portrayed her as a naked woman, emphasizing her association with fertility. Thousands of terracotta figurines of nude female figures found in Israel and Judah are commonly linked to her cult, suggesting widespread household devotion. In the biblical record, her name is altered to Ashtoreth, blending the consonants of her original name with the vowels of the Hebrew word bosheth, meaning shame. This deliberate distortion labeled her worship as disgraceful. She is often paired with Baal in Scripture, as in the repeated refrain in Judges that Israel served Baal and the Ashtoreths. The use of the plural form, Ashtoreths, indicates that her name became a catch-all term for goddess worship in general. This overlap sometimes caused confusion with Asherah, another prominent female deity, and suggests that in everyday practice, their cults were sometimes blurred. Astarte's worship received royal sanction in Israel during the reign of Solomon. The Bible states that he built a high place for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, on the Mount of Olives, alongside shrines for Chemosh and Molech. These cult sites persisted in Jerusalem for centuries, until Josiah's reforms in the 7th century BCE destroyed them. Astarte also appears in the story of the Philistines, who placed King Saul's armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths after his death at Mount Gilboa, 1 Samuel 31:10. Her popularity endured despite prophetic condemnation. Jeremiah 44 records exiles in Egypt openly defying the prophet's warnings, declaring that they would continue offering sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven because they believed prosperity had accompanied her worship in the past. This rare glimpse of everyday piety shows that Astarte addressed the personal and immediate concerns of ordinary people, especially women, in ways that Yahweh's official cult did not. Theologically, the biblical writers sought to erase her divine power by grouping her with all other foreign goddesses and labeling them collectively as shameful. but the persistence of her cult demonstrates how deeply the divine feminine was embedded in Israelite society. To many, Astarte was not a foreign threat but a vital source of fertility, love, and protection. Bel and Nebo. Bel, meaning Lord, was the biblical title for Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. His rise to supremacy is narrated in the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. Originally a minor agricultural deity, Marduk's power grew as Babylon became an empire. In the myth, he volunteers to fight the sea goddess Tiamat, who represents primordial chaos. Armed with a net, bow, and the winds, he slays her, splits her body in two, and fashions the heavens and the earth from her remains. From the blood of her general, Kingu, he creates humanity to serve the gods. As a reward for this victory, the divine assembly grants him kingship, along with 50 exalted names that embody the powers of other deities. His temple, Esagila, and its ziggurat, Etemenanki, stood as monumental symbols of his rule, and his statue was paraded in Babylon's Grand New Year festival. Nebo, or Nabu in Akkadian, was Marduk's son and divine scribe. He was the patron of wisdom, writing, and the scribal arts. His temple at Borsippa, called Ezida, was a major center of learning. As the keeper of the tablets of destiny, Nebo recorded the decrees of the gods and inscribed the fate of humanity. He was associated with the planet Mercury, and his name was so revered that Babylonian kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus incorporated it into their own titles. Each year during the Akitu festival, Nebo's statue was carried from Borsippa to Babylon to stand beside his father Marduk, a ritual reinforcing the bond of wisdom and kingship. The Hebrew prophet Isaiah directly attacked these gods in Isaiah 46, verses 1 through 2. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. Their idols are on beasts and cattle. The imagery deliberately mocks the festival processions. Instead of being honored in triumph, the gods are portrayed as burdens, heavy statues loaded onto tired animals, dragged away as plunder when Babylon falls. Isaiah's polemic drives home the point that these gods cannot save their people. They are lifeless objects, dependent on human carriers, while Yahweh alone is the God who carries his people from birth to old age. This contrast highlights two opposing theological models. In Babylon, worshippers bore the weight of their gods, literally carrying them through the streets. In Israel's faith, Yahweh bore the weight of his people, sustaining and delivering them. For the biblical writers, this inversion revealed the impotence of idols compared to the living God. The Enuma Elish reveals how Babylon framed its empire as divinely mandated. Just as Marduk ruled the gods, Babylon claimed the right to rule nations. Isaiah's critique dismantles this ideology by turning its rituals into images of failure. Bel and Nebo are shown not as world rulers but as helpless cargo. By exposing the emptiness of their power, the prophet framed Yahweh as the true sovereign not only of Israel but of all nations. The Divine Council. The concept of a divine council, a heavenly assembly of gods presided over by a high deity, was widespread throughout the ancient Near East. In Mesopotamian, Ugaritic, and Canaanite traditions, the council functioned as a royal court where the destinies of nations were decreed, wars were decided, and kingship was confirmed. At Ugarit, the high god El presided over the Furhilm, the assembly of the gods, while in Mesopotamia, Anu or later Marduk held this role. This structure reflected the political reality of the ancient world, where kings ruled with assemblies of advisors and officials. The Hebrew Bible depicts Yahweh within this same framework, but with a distinct theological transformation. In 1 Kings 22, the prophet Micaiah describes a vision of Yahweh seated on his throne, surrounded by all the host of heaven on his right and left. The council deliberates on how to entice King Ahab into battle, and a spirit volunteers to be a lying influence in the mouths of Ahab's prophets. In Job, verses 1 through 2, the sons of God present themselves before Yahweh, and the accuser challenges Job's righteousness. Psalm 82 is perhaps the most striking passage, declaring, "God stands in the divine council. In the midst of the gods he holds judgment." Here, Yahweh rebukes the members of the council for ruling unjustly and pronounces their downfall. "You shall die like men." The members of this council are called the sons of God, the holy ones, or the host of heaven. In the polytheistic world of Ugarit, these would have been literal deities, children of El. In the biblical worldview, they are redefined as subordinate spiritual beings, angels or heavenly servants, created by Yahweh, and subject to his authority. The oldest versions of Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 through 9, state that when God divided the nations, he allotted them according to the number of the sons of God, while Israel remained his special possession. This suggests that other nations were assigned to spiritual beings, but Yahweh retained direct rule over his chosen people. Psalm 82 then depicts Yahweh judging these spiritual rulers for corruption, stripping them of power, and asserting his right to inherit all nations. This adaptation of the divine council motif preserved the richness of a populated heavenly realm while upholding strict monotheism. Yahweh presides not as first among equals, but as the uncreated sovereign over all beings. The other figures are not rival gods, but his servants, ministers, and agents who execute his will. This structure allowed Israel to explain cosmic events and divine actions through a celestial court without compromising Yahweh's uniqueness. Theologically, the divine council served as a bridge between Israelite faith and its cultural environment. It answered the need for a vivid spiritual world while redefining it in monotheistic terms. Where other nations saw councils of competing gods, Israel proclaimed that Yahweh alone was king, judge, and lawgiver. Even in the midst of heavenly beings, his sovereignty was absolute.